let me go back in time and just talk a little bit about, as a review, since I know the oxyhemoglobin curve, again, looks at the relationship between saturation and dissolved partial pressure. If we looked at that oxygen content formula that I just put up there, the amount of oxygen that's carried by the dissolved is minuscule compared to what's attached to the hemoglobin. The vast majority of the huge majority of what we have oxygen being transported is transported as oxyhemoglobin. Very limited amount is dissolved. However, the dissolved is important because it's going to tell me what my saturation possibly could be. So if you say which is more important, the PO2 or the SaO2, the answer is yes. They're both important. Okay. There's a couple of points that we want to remember. If we look at a PaO2 of about 100, we have a saturation of about 97. That's our normal arterial saturation. If I look at a PaO2 of 40, it's a saturation of about 75%. And if we look at a PO2 somewhere around 60, that's a PaO2 of about 90, a saturation of about 90. So that 60 is basically the point at which you go from the flat portion to the steep portion of the curve. PaO2 of about 60, SaO2 of about 90. So between 60 and 100 is that flat portion where where big changes in PaO2 yield very small changes in saturation. This is important because that's the area in which we function most of our lives. So that means that changing the PaO2 has minimal effect on how much is actually being carried on the hemoglobin. That's a good thing. As we start progressing down and getting a PaO2 below 60, that is what is facilitating the unloading of oxygen, which is what happens at the tissue level. Once the hemoglobin, the erythrocytes get to the tissues, get to the cells, they want to unload that oxygen. Well, it's the fact that CO2 levels are higher at the cell, the temperature is a little bit higher because of all the metabolic activity in the cell. All those things cause unloading to happen. Oops. We talked about the factors that shift it to the left and to the right. Where right means unloading and left means loading. Right? At the left, you have a higher affinity, meaning there's a greater demand by hemoglobin for oxygen. The love is there. On the right side, you have a reduction in affinity. Get away from me. I don't love you anymore. And the things that shifted to the left are all decreased. Decreased hydrogen ions, decrease in PCO2, decrease in temp. We're going to cover today this thing called 2,3-DPG. And on the right, everything is increased. All those would be increasing. Vaguely remember this? Okay. So we talked about how increasing the PCO2 causes that unloading to happen. 2,3-DPG is basically a phosphate that is present within the erythrocyte that competitively binds with hemoglobin so that oxygen can't. Simple way of putting it. There's more to the story there, but for our purposes, that's enough. High levels of 2,3-DPG will cause a reduction in high 2,3-DPG decrease in affinity for oxygen. So saturation goes down. Basically facilitates unloading. And it has a little bit of a longer duration, but for our purposes, that's not a big deal. Really, all I want you to know is that if you have a high 2,3-DPG, you have easy unloading being present. And we see that with things like cellular hypoxia. We want to have easy unloading when we're anemic because we don't have a whole lot of hemoglobin there. So what we want to have unloading easily. We'll see it with ascent to high altitudes. It's what the body naturally does is it produces more hemoglobin as you acclimate to living in a higher altitude, but you also have a higher level of 2,3-DPG to release the oxygen because, that thin air doesn't carry as much. Well, we know better now. And the level will be lower, and really the only one that we're concerning ourselves with is stored blood. If blood is not utilized and when we're transfusing, you could actually have blood without any 2,3-DPG, which is not going to be entirely useful at the time of transfusion. Okay, so that's all I want you to know about that organic phosphate. All right. We said that PaCO2 has an effect on oxygen saturation, right? As I increase my PaCO2, which is what I would see at the cell, I have a decrease in affinity. So my saturation will be less. And the opposite would be true also. If I drop my PaCO2, which is what happens at the lungs, I increase my saturation because I have a higher affinity now. A leftward shift. This is right. This is left. The effect that carbon dioxide has on the ability of the hemoglobin to bond with oxygen, so the effect on the affinity, is known as the Bohr effect. Just gave it a fancy name. The way to remember it is that Bohr has an OH in it. Oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve has an OH in it. So it's the Bohr effect. We're going to find that the level of oxygen within the bloodstream also affects the amount of CO2 that can be transported. Of course, it's got a different name. But basically, higher levels of CO2 means that you have a rightward shift, and that means that you can't carry as much oxygen, or facilitates the unloading of oxygen. So one goes up, the other goes down. And it's all a good thing. It's what we want to happen at the tissue level. Because PaCO2 is higher at the tissues than it was in the arterial system, we have movement of CO2 out of the cell into the bloodstream that's going to cause the oxygen on the hemoglobin to be released. It's all a good swap that we end up having. But that's called the Bohr effect. All right. This concept of oxygen transport is basically talking about how much oxygen we're actually moving to the tissues. And it's a combination of that oxygen content, which we have just been calculating, multiplied by the cardiac output, and a factor of 10. So if my normal oxygen content is 20, my normal cardiac output is 5, 20 times 5 times 10, means that I have about 1,000 milliliters of oxygen being transported to the tissues every minute. That's the oxygen delivery or oxygen transport. I don't have sufficient amount of oxygen being transported, that means I have to go anaerobic, which would be a bad thing. I could have a reduction in any one of those components. Could be that my hemoglobin's low. Could be that my oxygen tension, my PaO2 is low, which is making my saturation low. Could be my heart rate is low. Could be my preload or afterload or contractility is out of whack. All those things play together. So our job as a respiratory therapist is supposed to make sure the patient is adequately oxygenated. Some of that we have control over as far as delivering oxygen, but some of it's cardiovascular played. Yeah.
So is 10 going to be a constant?
10 is a constant. This is in milliliters per deciliter of blood. This is in liters per minute. To make all the units work out well, we multiply it times 10. So bottom line is that when we're looking at oxygen to the tissue, there's multiple factors involved. And we now know how to calculate both the oxygen content and the oxygen and the cardiac output, and we know what factors go into each of them. So if the overall delivery to the tissues is low, got to go back and figure out which part of that is at fault and fix it. Okay. All right. Tissues need some kind of need oxygen to be able to survive, right? So there is a relationship between how much I am supplying to the tissues in the sense of oxygen delivery as compared with how much the body utilizes. What we're going to call oxygen consumption. A simple symbol we'll find for that is V with a dot over it with O2. When I was a kid growing up, this was a long time ago, probably back in the 18th century, we didn't really have supermarkets. I mean, there was corner stores all over the place, but wasn't the butcher shop might have had meats and whatnot, but really vegetables and that kind of stuff wasn't. You didn't get them at the corner store. Bottom line, but they had this fruit truck that came down the streets. Chuck and Bud's actually was the name of the company. But he had in the summer, he had the speaker out, strawberries, 3 quarts for $1 strawberries, and people would come out and buy stuff off the fruit truck. The amount of, let's just say the amount of strawberries he left with, let's say he had 100 quarts of strawberries that he had on his truck leaving the neighborhood. If he came back with only 50 quarts at the end of the day, that means that somebody has purchased 50 quarts. That the consumption of strawberries that day was 50 quarts of strawberries. Fair deal so far? A couple of factors related here, though. If he's going through the neighborhood really slow, these nasty kids in the neighborhood, they would sneak up and they would steal stuff off the fruit truck. So some of that loss in strawberries was not because people were buying them, they were being stolen. So going through the neighborhood very slowly means that you have less coming back in the form here. So some of that 50 could be that people were utilizing it, eating strawberries. Some of it was due to the fact that he's going through the neighborhood slowly and the kids are stealing it. Rat bastards. Not me. But I heard about this. If he goes by too fast, well, no, nobody's got time to buy anything. They can't come out to buy. So he's going to come back with something less than that 50. I'm sorry. He's going to come back with something greater than 50. He's going to come back with, say, 75 quarts. Because nobody has, he's going through the neighborhood so fast that they can't run outside and buy it. So there's a relationship that exists between the speed of the truck, the amount the people want, and the amount he comes back with. The analogy makes sense? Okay, let me put some names on this. This is oxygen consumption. How much strawberries are being eaten is the same thing as how much oxygen we're using. That's how much we're sending out, is our oxygen content. This is how much we're coming back with, our mixed venous content. That's a V with a line over it, meaning mixed venous. Give you an example. If I were to draw blood from my arm, I would be able to measure the venous PO2 and the venous saturation and calculate venous content. However, that's telling me what my hand's doing as far as oxygen needs. What about my liver? What about my heart? What about my brain? So what we really want to measure is the venous blood that's in the pulmonary artery, because that's a mixture of all of it together. Because different parts of the body have different metabolic needs. Okay, what about the truck speed? Oh, that's cardiac output. So there's a relationship that exists between how much oxygen is used, demand, and how much oxygen is supplied, oxygen delivery. If there's an increase in demand, there better damn well be an increase in supply, or we're going to have a problem. If there's a bigger need than I can put out, we got a problem where now we're going to go anaerobic. Okay. Concept makes sense in a generality. Okay. So there's different way that we can evaluate the supply-demand relationship. One is to look at the difference between the oxygen content in the arterial system and the oxygen content in the venous system. And there's just a couple different ways it's depicted, in a sense that this is arterial minus venous or arterial minus venous, saying the same thing. Normal oxygen content in the arterial system is about 20 volumes percent. Normal oxygen content in the venous system is about 15 volumes percent. Oh, there they are right there. Sorry. So the normal difference is about 5. So I'm leaving with 20, coming back with 15. What if I'm leaving with 20 and coming back with 18? I'm only using 3. 2. That would mean either, and this is a low value, right? That means that either it's going by too fast and the kids don't have time to steal the strawberries off the cart, increase cardiac output, or a decrease in utilization. People just don't want to buy strawberries. I got a bunch of strawberries canned from last year. Get away from me. So there's a decrease in demand.
So a question would just be set up just like that.
Yeah. I measure my arterial or I could be really mean and make you calculate the arterial content and the venous content and what's the difference between them. And then, based upon that, which of the following could be a possible cause? If I have a high cardiac output, there's insufficient time for oxygen to be unloaded. There's insufficient time for the kids to steal off the truck. Or for people to buy it, for that matter. If there's no demand, if there's no oxygen utilization, you're going to get the same exact picture happening. Why would I not have oxygen needs? Well, maybe I'm cold. What do we do in the OR? We bring the room temperature down to, 30 below zero. Some days. And that's intentional to decrease the body's oxygen utilization. And we'll find that there's actually some toxins that exist, cyanide being one example, where oxygen can't be used. Conversely, why would that value be increased? Why would the difference between what I'm leaving with and coming back be a big number? In other words, a lot's being extracted, a lot's being used. Low cardiac output. It's going by, so kids stealing food off. Or I have a normal cardiac output, but I got a big demand. I'm stripping it off. I spiked the temp and I got a fever. That fever needs more fuel. I got the fever. Got the gist of it? So this oxygen content difference can give us an idea of how supply and demand are working hand in hand. Am I supplying sufficient enough for the patient's demand? If that value is not 5, roundabouts, then either I have a problem with supply or I have a problem with demand, or maybe both. Go ahead.
What if the supply isn't normal? What if you start out with, what if it's low?
Let's say I had an oxygen content of 17. You should still see 12 coming back. Yeah. Great question. We said the O2 delivery was 1,000 milliliters per minute. If you go back and look at that, 20 times 5 times 10, it's 1,000. Okay? This value, oxygen consumption, is about 250 milliliters per minute. How much we actually use is 250 milliliters per minute. Unless you're one of those stupid people who are, getting on a treadmill and then you're going to use more oxygen. But if you're normal, like me, we only utilize about 250 milliliters per minute. I'm supplying 1,000, but I'm only using 250. That's a huge reserve, right? But it's needed for those stupid times when you get on a treadmill. That you're going to be consuming more oxygen, I got to have more oxygen being delivered. Okay? So even though my oxygen content may be low, I still have enough reserves that the extraction shouldn't make a big difference. I should still be kept in that 5 range. Thank you. Good question. You brought me back on track.
It's not the percentage. It's a quarter. It's a difference of the price.
It's the difference between the arterial and the venous content that's going to tell us whether or not supply is matching demand. That's one way to look at the picture. There's multiple things we can end up looking at. But this is called the arterial venous oxygen content difference. I could also look at this with something called the oxygen extraction ratio, which is basically a percentage of how much oxygen is being used. If I send out 20 and I bring back 15, what percentage of what I sent out am I bringing back? Oh, well, let's calculate it. So this is 20 minus 15 divided by 20. 5 divided by 20, 25%. 25% of what I'm putting out is what I'm using. I'm only using 25% of what I'm delivering. Yes, Patricia.
But if you have 17 at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and you're bringing back 12, it's not 25%. That was my question before. And you said, no, it's not the percentage, but now you're saying it is the percentage.
In this case, I am using it. 17 minus 12 divided by 17. 5 divided by 17. What does that work out to be?
That's 25.
It's pretty close to it, though. 29%. So we're close to it. And I just picked numbers out of my head. Chances are, in most cases, assuming normal metabolism, if your hemoglobin's a little bit low, you're probably going to be within the normal range. And oh my God, look at this. Same exact thing is going on. If I have more oxygen being used, that must mean either the truck's going slow or the demand is up. And I just give some more examples here. Beside hyperthermia, seizures. I don't know this word. Do you guys know this word? Okay. And it's going to be reduced with the opposites being there. So just another different way to assess whether or not supply and demand make sense. All right, let's talk then about this concept of venous admixture, which is basically that mixing of good oxygenated blood with poor deoxygenated blood. It's going to result in so this is coming back from the body with a PO2 of 40, right? Saturation is 75.
What's that then?
You just mind your business, lady. This is 106 inside the alveolus, so the net effect is that I end up with an elevated oxygen level. What about if I have a situation where I have some atelectasis? You've seen that term before? Never? You're lying to me. I know you're lying to me because you're hearing crackles. Did you talk about breast sounds yet? No. Atelectasis are those alveoli that are collapsed. So what ends up happening then is my PO2 stays the same. There's no gas exchange because that alveoli is collapsed. So now I have poorly oxygenated blood mixing in, that should be 106 there. With my oxygenated blood. This is called intrapulmonary shunting. Did we talk about the other types of shunts we have? Are there anatomic shunts? Say yes. Thank you. What are they? The Bayesian veins, which are where? In the heart. Thank you. Bronchial veins. We know the bronchial arteries are supplying oxygenated blood to the tracheobronchial tree. The venous portion of that, the drainage of that, doesn't go back to the superior vena cava. It dumps into the pulmonary vein. And the last one is the pleural veins. Same exact idea. Excuse me. These I can't do much about. And by the way, we'll also find that there are some shunts that are there from cardiac defects. When we get to neonatal next March or whenever it is, we'll end up talking a lot about the different cardiac defects, because the good Lord makes us normal most of the time. Every once in a while, he puts a hole where it doesn't belong, attaches one of the branches. There's actually one where the aorta and the pulmonary artery are switched. What were you thinking? So, huh?
They both have a valve?
No, the problem is that you would have two circuitries that are not connected. Oops, that would not be good. So, at any rate, yes, ma'am.
So, pulmonary shunting is another name for the venous admixture?
It's one of the causes of venous admixture. These are causes also of venous admixture. Correct. Venous admixture means that I'm taking some blood that is good oxygenated blood and mixing in with it venous blood, used blood, blood with low saturations. Got it? All right. So, under normal conditions, hopefully there's not a whole lot of these. Again, a shunt is perfusion without ventilation. Let me write that out. Perfusion without ventilation. Which is what we have here. That does look rather obscene, doesn't it? All right. So perfusion without ventilation is the definition of shunting. In the case of pulmonary shunting, it's basically that which goes from the right side of the heart back to the left without coming in contact with gas exchange and alveolus. Talked about the true shunts, anatomic shunts, and then we're going to look at what we're going to call relative shunts, meaning that there is a relationship where there may not be, where there is some ventilation, but it's not proportional to the amount of perfusion you end up having. This is an important statement. Shunts, by and large, true shunts definitely, but relative shunts, relatively, are refractory to oxygen therapy. So if I have a patient who has a reduction in their PaO2 because there's lots and lots of these guys, I'm going to I'm going to end up having a patient who's hypoxemic, right? The treatment for this hypoxemia, putting them on O2 is not going to help out a whole lot. If I put them on, let's say that I have 20% of my cardiac output going through the pulmonary system are going to these guys. 80% are going to these guys. Well, that means there's a lot of blood that's got this low PO2 mixing in. Can we agree that that's going to be a pretty low arterial value coming back to the heart, to the left side of the heart? So I put them on a high concentration of oxygen, and I make this value, instead of being 106, let's say I make it 200. By increasing the inspired oxygen concentration. Doesn't matter, I still got 20% that doesn't have that present. So the bottom line is, you're not going to see the expected level of increase in oxygenation that you would anticipate having if you had somebody who had some other cause of hypoxemia. Does that make sense? These are the type of people, the only way that I'm going to improve in the case of a shunt, the oxygen level, is to re-expand that alveolus. Get it back open again. So long as it stays collapsed, it's non-participating.
So shunts are due to collapsed alveoli?
That is right. One of the causes of intrapulmonary shunting is a collapsed alveoli, yes. This is the definition of a shunt, where perfusion exceeds ventilation. Probably a better way of saying it. Perfusion exceeds ventilation. Okay. Okay, we talked about some of these in 1060. Remember, we can take this alveolar level and compare it to the, you know what? Let's do this. Let's take a break. Let's go ahead and continue on. When we were talking in 1050, we talked about the different ways that we can go ahead and evaluate how well somebody's oxygenating. If I told you that the PO2 was 90, you would say, bitchin', that's great. But if I told you the FiO2 was 60% to get to that 90, ooh, that's not so good. So we can look at this also, the AA ratio, and we can look at the PF ratio. Those are all ways that we can evaluate how well somebody's oxygenating. One of the causes of somebody having an inability to adequately oxygenate is having a big intrapulmonary shunt. Lots and lots of these means a bigger chance you're going to have profound hypoxemia. So how do I measure how much of that blood is shunted? Okay, I'm going to go back and go through a couple of symbols. This is perfusion, total perfusion, i.e. cardiac output, and what percentage of that cardiac output that's perfusing through the lungs is encountering a shunt. if I say shunted blood. So I want to find out the percentage of how much blood is being shunted, how much blood is going by alveoli that are not open compared to the total. Now, we all know how to calculate this, right? Sure. Or you will know how by the time that part of the exam comes up, which won't be on the exam on Monday or Tuesday. This stuff won't, no. Through F. Yeah, really.
Just leave it at that. Wow, cool.
So this, I could do the same exact value, same exact calculation, but using Venous values, using PVO2, and SVO2. Agreed? Okay. I got a weird symbol there. C with the content of end capillary oxygen. Now, what the hell am I talking about? I've been probably saying that since end of August, but let me keep on going. What's the oxygen content of the blood immediately after it passes by a functional alveoli? Well, calculating the content is exactly the same way. Except we're going to make the assumption that the saturation of that blood is perfect. It's 100%. Every bit of hemoglobin that could possibly be carrying oxygen is carrying oxygen. So this would be the same thing as multiplying this by 1.0. I don't even need to put it in the formula because it's 100% saturated. Follow me? I'm also assuming that every bit of oxygen that is available in the alveolus is getting across. So my partial pressure of oxygen is my alveolar value. It's a perfect alveolus. Every bit of dissolved gets across, every bit of hemoglobin gets saturated. So my formula for calculating this end capillary content is the hemoglobin times 1.34 times 1.0 if you want to include that, plus the alveolar value times 0.003. Okay. How this is derived, you don't want to know right now. If you ever do, I can show you. But this is the way that we're going to evaluate how much blood is being shunted. Need lots of information to be able to calculate it. Let's go ahead and calculate one for fun. Now, I will tell you, and before this time comes, I'll double check myself, but I don't believe I'm requiring you to calculate that at this point in time. So this is one of the formulas that I'm giving you now as kind of a lead-in, but we're not going to worry about it just yet. I reserve the right to torture you with that later on. Fair? Okay. So here's a kind of a question that you might see on a test in future years. I obtained the following data on the patient. What's the percent shunt? So what I need to find, again, is my formula for the shunt equation. CCO2 minus CaO2 divided by CCO2 minus CVO2. Bah. Okay. So let's calculate what our arterial oxygen content is. Hemoglobin times 1.34 times SaO2. Add that to my dissolved component, what's in the bloodstream, times 0.03003. So that's equal to, my hemoglobin is 13, 1.34, arterial saturation 0.91, plus arterial dissolved 68 times 0.003. Somebody got a calculator, can give me a hand on this? $13 times 1.34 times 0.91. And then 68 times 0.003. 0.2. So that would mean our oxygen content is 16.05. 16.05. Got it? Okay. CVO2. $13, 1.34, 0.72, plus 38 times 0.003. Anybody get the first part? 12.5? Sounds good. 38 times 0.003. Again, we don't need to be quite that. But it's 12.6. Oh, good God in heaven, are we done yet? No. This is why I don't do it on a test. It takes too long. For now. But you become very skilled later in life. You can't see that one that well. Oh, I like this equation. Okay, so that means that my alveolar value is 749 minus 47 times 0.9 minus 28 divided by 0.8. So this is 702 times 0.9 minus 28 divided by 0.8. $631.8, is that right?
Yeah.
Woohoo! Now that one I can't do in my head. 35? I'm impressing myself. So this would end up being then 596.8. Okay. Oh, there's 5. Yeah. CCO2. It's a little bit easier. Hemoglobin times 1.34 times 1 plus PaO2 times 0.003. So 13 times 1.34. Add to that 596.8 times 0.003. What's the first part there? 17.43. And the second part? 600. 19.2. Is that right? 19.2. That was an easy step. We're almost done. So what does this work out to be? 19.2 minus 16.05. I'm sorry? 3.15, and on a denominator? So what did it work out to be, Patricia? 48% of the blood that is coming from the pulmonary artery is coming back to the pulmonary vein, not coming in contact with an oxygen. Oh boy, that's bad. Can we agree? If I were to look at my AA gradient, 596.8 minus 68, 530. Ouch. If I were to look at my AA ratio, 68 divided by 596.8, very small number. If I were to look at my PF ratio, that'd be bad too. So they kind of all go together. They all kind of point in the same direction, and I got a lousy situation here. But heck, I could just look at that saying I got a PO2 of 68, the saturation or with an FiO2 of 90%. Not good. Okay. Well, yeah, I got 48% of the blood not coming in contact with an alveolus. It's going to lead to some real big time problems. Okay. So again, I don't think I'm going to require you to calculate this yet. but I just need to go through the derivation of it to show, not derivation, but to show how you would actually calculate one of these. Normally, you and I walking around have about a 3 to 5% normal shunt. That's those anatomic shunts. No big deal. Yes, Charles.
The value in here says 2 to 5.
Okay.
What one do you want us to sell? 3 to 5?
Okay, 2 to 5, 3 to 5, whatever.
Ours says 3 to 5.
Yeah, ours says 3 to 5.
This is the important one. This is the important one. The high level, not the low level.
Okay, just making sure.
Yep, 5 is the one that you got to worry about, not the bottom. And when you start getting to values above 15%, you start seeing some profound hypoxemia. That is refractory. O2 might help slightly, but it's not going to help to the extent you think it's going to help. So the answer isn't to put the oxygen, turn up the FiO2. The goal is to reestablish those alveoli, recruit the alveoli. Got it? You know what? I'm going to stop here. And we'll talk about hypoxia.